The girl in the photograph. See, as I'm a passionate photographer, always seeking to capture nostalgic moments. One day I ventured to a place that perfectly matched my theme. After a long journey, I arrived at a deserted school with an eerie atmosphere. I found myself standing alone on the school playground, surrounded by tall trees. The ground was covered with fallen leaves, as it was autumn at that time. Unable to resist, I took out my camera and began capturing the scenery that I loved so much. I photographed the towering trees and the dilapidated classrooms. I continued capturing the scenes I adored until the sun started to set, reluctantly returning to my lodging. Though tired, I was satisfied with the many photos I had taken. I developed the pictures and sat by the window to admire my work. Suddenly, something strange caught my eye. The photos I took of the classroom were all the same, one after another. I thought it was due to an error during the development process, so I didn't pay much attention and continued flipping through them. However, as I flipped through several identical photos, I noticed that the angle of the classroom door gradually changed. At first, it was slightly open, and then it gradually opened wider, revealing a dark figure. I was perplexed, as I hadn't noticed anyone while taking the photos. I thought maybe the camera lens had malfunctioned, so I continued to the next photos. However, in the subsequent ones, the dark figure appeared to be getting closer. The closer I got to the end, the clearer the image of a little girl became. She seemed to be getting closer, as if she were about to step out of the photo and into the room with me. A chill ran down my spine, and I sat frozen in my chair. Suddenly, the window in front of me swung open, as if pushed by an unseen force. The room's lights flickered on and off. The tension in the room reached its peak. Just as I was about to rush to close the window, I saw the girl from the photograph standing in the courtyard below. Her hair was disheveled. She wore a thin white dress, and her face bore a sinister smile. Her eyes emitted a green glow. She stared directly at me. I was so terrified that I fainted on the spot. Several months passed in the blink of an eye, and I had sealed away those photos I had taken that day. It wasn't until I moved out that I left them behind. The landlord found a new tenant who moved in after I left. After cleaning the place, the new tenant discovered an envelope left in a drawer. Inside were many photos of different schools. Curiously, the new tenant began flipping through them, and the horrifying events replayed once again. It began as a typical evening in our suburban neighborhood, but what unfolded would forever change the way we looked at the ordinary. Emily and John, the couple across the street, were always the heart of our community, known for their laughter and playful antics. That evening, Emily was chasing John around their front yard with her camera, capturing his feigned annoyance and laughter. "Stop it, Emily," John protested with a smile, trying to shield himself from her persistent clicks. "Why are you obsessed with photographing me?" Emily's laughter was contagious, and even from across the street I found myself smiling at their playful routine. Little did we know, this light-hearted scene was about to take a dark turn. After John left for his night shift as a taxi driver, the atmosphere in Emily's house shifted. The open curtains that usually revealed a warm, inviting home now framed a solitary figure. Emily sat at her computer, uploading the day's photos. But as she looked at the images, her usual bright demeanor faded into concern. In every photo, John's eyes seemed hollow, his expressions unnaturally distorted. Suddenly, her phone rang, piercing the silence of her home. The voice on the other end was emotionless, delivering the devastating news. John had been in a car accident and did not survive. The phone slipped from Emily's trembling hands, clattering to the floor. As she turned back to the computer, a horrifying transformation unfolded on the screen. The images of John were changing before her eyes. His expressions twisted into looks of abject terror, his eyes turning into dark, empty voids. One by one, the photos blurred, their colors draining away, leaving behind nothing but empty frames. In the following days, a heavy pall hung over Emily's home. Neighbors reported strange occurrences, flickering lights, unexplained shadows flitting past windows, and an oppressive feeling of being watched. Emily, once vibrant and full of life, became reclusive, her house shrouded in an unsettling silence. Then, one chilling night, a blood-curdling scream echoed from Emily's house. I, along with a few other neighbors, rushed over, fearing the worst. The front door was ajar, leading us into a scene that was both surreal and tragic. Emily lay motionless on the floor, her eyes wide open in a silent scream, staring at the now blank computer screen. Around her, scattered photographs told a haunting story, each one drained of color, some featuring eerie, indistinct figures lurking in the background. Every single photo of Emily was gone, as if she'd been erased from the very memories she cherished. The police investigation concluded it was a case of sudden, grief-induced psychosis leading to suicide. But those of us who witnessed the aftermath knew there was something more. Whispers of a curse, a vengeful spirit, or some otherworldly force circulated among us. The photographs, now just empty frames, seemed to mock our attempts to rationalize what had happened. To this day, the story of Emily and John and the vanishing photographs remains a topic of hushed conversations in our neighborhood. It's a tale that blurs the lines between reality and the supernatural, a grim reminder of the unseen forces that may lurk just beyond the veil of our understanding. One untouched photograph. During the 1970s in the United States, fashion was a mix of vibrant colors and bold styles, with denim and rock-style clothing being particularly popular. People idolized rock stars and loved their iconic attire. If a young man or woman had an authentic rock-style outfit, they would undoubtedly receive admiring glances. Even just wearing a denim jacket or a piece of clothing with a rock band emblem would also bring a sense of pride. Jenny, an 18-year-old girl, was such a young woman. She loved rock-style outfits and wanted to take a photo of herself wearing a denim jacket with band patches, looking cool and rebellious. She saw her colleague Emily recently wearing a rock-style leather jacket, looking very powerful, like a rock star. But Jenny didn't know how to get a real rock-style outfit. She pleaded with her mother to make her a denim jacket with band patches, and her mother had agreed, but the jacket was not ready yet. Jenny had only been working at a clothing store for a little over 6 months. Emily had been there for about 2 years longer. They worked 6 days per week, rotating between morning, afternoon, and evening shifts, with 1 week to complete the rotation. The store was located in the city, while Jenny lived in a suburban area quite far from the store. It took her nearly an hour to cycle each way. She didn't mind it during the morning shift, but when she had to go for the afternoon shift or come back from the evening shift, the road was less crowded, and she felt a little nervous if she had to walk alone. Fortunately, Emily lived not far from her, and they would walk together, which made it much better. They had to pass by an old cemetery on their way to and from work. In the evening, when they passed by the cemetery, the wind rustled the old trees, giving a creepy feeling. Even when the two of them were together, they still felt a little uneasy and would pedal their bikes faster to pass by. It was time for the evening shift again. Unfortunately, Emily had recently been transferred to a morning shift position in another department, so Jenny was left alone this time. As she cycled after work, she felt as though someone was following her from behind, but when she turned around, there was no one there. When she got closer to the cemetery, she became even more nervous, and then her bike chain came off. She quickly got off the bike and tried to fix it under the dim streetlight, but she couldn't put it back on no matter what she did. Anxious and afraid, she looked around hoping to see someone passing by who could help her. At that moment, a figure came walking from the direction of the cemetery. He was tall and well-built, wearing a leather jacket and denim jeans. With his thick hair and intense eyes, he looked quite handsome. The stranger approached Jenny, nodded, and squatted down to help her fix the chain. After a few tries, he managed to put it back on. Jenny was very grateful and kept thanking the stranger. He didn't reply, but just smiled and nodded at her before walking away. Jenny quickly got back on her bike and rode home. The next day and the day after, the same thing happened. Jenny would feel like someone was following her as she cycled, but when she looked back, there was no one there. When she approached the cemetery, she became even more nervous, but during those times, her bike chain never came off. With her bike chain no longer slipping, Jenny felt a tinge of sadness. Although the stranger had only been with her for a couple of minutes each time he helped, his rugged appearance, strong posture, and smiles had left a mark in Jenny's heart. She developed a crush and often found herself daydreaming about talking, chatting, and taking walks with him. She even fantasized about wearing her rock-style outfit and taking a photo with him. Time flew by quickly, and it was time for Jenny's morning shift. Her mother had finally finished making the denim jacket with band patches for her, and Jenny was very satisfied when she put it on and looked in the mirror. She made plans with Emily to go take a photo together, wearing their rock-style outfits whenever they found the time. During their lunch break on the day of the photo shoot, the sky was dark and gloomy, as if it were already evening, and it looked like it was going to rain soon. Jenny and Emily hurriedly changed into their outfits and went to a nearby photography studio to take their photos. The photographer, a bespectacled man, suggested they take a half-body shot to highlight their faces while showcasing their rock-style outfits. The two girls sat down and posed, following the photographer's instructions. As he took their photo, he asked them to smile a little more. With a click, the photographer said, "It's done. Looks great." They were told to come back in 2 days to pick up their photos. 2 days later, they went back eagerly to collect their photos. But when they handed over their ticket, the clerk said that the photos hadn't been developed yet. Jenny and Emily were angry and asked the clerk, "The ticket clearly stated to pick them up 2 days later, so why weren't they developed?" The clerk hesitated and said, "If the photos weren't developed, you'll have to ask the photographer." Angry, they went to find the photographer and demanded an explanation. The photographer looked nervous when he saw them and said, "Were you the ones who came to take the photo?" They replied, "Yes." The photographer asked again, "When I took the photo for both of you, were there any other people in the studio?" They still replied, "No." The photographer emphasized, "I remember it clearly that I took the photo specifically for you two." They confirmed, "You see, that's correct." The photographer shook his head nervously and said, I've been working as a photographer for over a decade, and I've never seen anything like this. I took a photo of 2 people, but 3 figures appeared on the negative. Jenny and Emily were shocked. They asked to see the negative. As they looked at it, Jenny let out a cry, and her face filled with terror, staring blankly ahead without saying a word. Emily also felt a sense of dread, as she seemed to understand something, shaking her head in distress. Soon after, Emily told the photographer, "Please don't develop the photo," and pulled the dazed Jenny out of the studio. Back in the workshop, Jenny slowly regained some awareness, but she remained vacant, unable to form a complete sentence or show any sign of normalcy. Without needing to ask further, Emily had already guessed the cause. On the negative, the figure standing behind Jenny was undoubtedly the mysterious stranger who had helped her with the bike chain. Poor sister. It's all because of your obsession with rock-style outfits and mysterious strangers that you invited the supernatural, sighed Emily. Years passed, and whenever the topic of photography came up, Emily still felt a lingering fear. The husband in the shadow. Last year, my neighbor, Mr. Smith, passed away. Sadly, I couldn't make it back for the funeral. When I returned home for New Year, my mother reminded me to visit Mrs. Smith as soon as possible. Although they were just neighbors, they practically raised me when I was a child, and I had a strong connection to them. Arriving at their house, I coincidentally met their daughter returning from work. Mrs. Smith wasn't home. She had gone to the cemetery by herself. My aunt, Mrs. Smith's daughter, seemed displeased with her mother's frequent visits to the cemetery. I found this odd because it's common for the elderly to visit the graves of loved ones regularly. Noticing my confusion, my aunt explained the situation. Since Mr. Smith's passing, Mrs. Smith had been in a deep state of despair. She carried a photo of her late husband everywhere and wrote him letters every night, detailing her daily life. The family was concerned about her safety, especially her solo trips to the cemetery. Mrs. Smith, however, insisted that someone was always there waiting for her. Suspecting that her grief might have led to the psychological disorder, I decided to drive to the cemetery to bring her back. The cemetery was quite a distance from town, and it started to drizzle as I arrived. Disoriented, I parked at an intersection to ask for directions. That's when I saw Mrs. Smith walking towards me, accompanied by someone holding an umbrella for he. Excited to see me, she greeted me warmly as I helped her into the car. I thanked the person who had accompanied her and realized he looked strangely familiar, dressed in an old-fashioned traditional suit. On the way back, Mrs. Smith mentioned that she had chosen a photo of her husband from his youth for his memorial picture. She wanted to remember him as he was when they first met. She took out a small black and white photo from her pocket. It was of a young man in a grey suit, smiling. The image struck me. It was the same man who had been holding the umbrella for her at the cemetery. Photos. I grew up in a family that owned a photo printing shop, a common sight in many American towns. Sometimes I would help out at the store and see all kinds of photos. But what intrigued me the most were the pictures from the local police. They were usually related to car accidents or crime scenes. At first, it didn't bother me much, but over time, I started to find them strange and unsettling. I remember this one time when I read a ghost story. It didn't seem all that frightening at first, but the more I thought about it, the scarier it became. The story was about a film crew in Hollywood who took a group photo after finishing a shoot. When they developed the photo, each person in the picture had their own copy. But the strange thing was that everyone saw someone different standing next to them. The lead actress saw a woman in her photo, but it turned into a man. The assistant director saw an old man, which later became a woman. The lighting technician saw a child, but it was an old lady in the final picture. Everyone saw something different. They showed the photo to the director, who tightly held his own copy. No one knew that he was the only one in the photo. Then there was this one day when the local police brought in some photos to be developed. My dad had gotten used to it over the years. Most of the time, they were photos from car accidents or crime scenes. My mum, initially unable to bear looking at them, eventually became desensitized. That day, my dad noticed something odd in a few photos. The first set was from a car accident. The victim, a young woman, was hit by a truck while riding her bike. The scene was gruesome, but what caught our attention was that the woman's bike was untouched and she was impaled through the waist. Her head was perfectly intact with no injuries, but her expression was one of sheer terror, as if she'd seen something unimaginably horrifying. Our employee, Mike, noticed something else strange. In the photo of the accident, which happened in the evening, there was a blurry figure crouched next to the woman, looking at her. We couldn't make out any features on the figure's face. It was just a dark blur. It seemed as if they were trying to lift her up. The police officer who brought in the photos was surprised to see this figure, as he didn't recall anyone like that at the scene. He mentioned that such anomalies weren't uncommon for them. He told us about a homicide case a few months back. An elderly man was found dead in his home, and the police took photos of the crime scene. When the photos were developed, they showed another person standing next to the dead man, wearing a bloodied white sweater. This led them to investigate the victim's nephew, who eventually confessed to the murder. Another curious incident involved a middle-aged man who brought in a roll of film. When developed, all 32 photos showed people with their eyes closed. Despite our usual policy not to give customers photos with closed eyes, he insisted on taking them. It reminded us of a family who had their photos developed a few weeks prior, with none of them having their eyes open. As we discussed these events, I couldn't help but think about the unexplained and mysterious forces that might exist beyond our perception. There are so many things in this world that we will never understand, and perhaps some things are meant to remain a mystery. The little ghost in the photo. I walked into my son's room and kissed his adorable little face. My little one, Timmy, was already 6 years old and fast asleep. My mother approached and complained, "Why are you just coming back now? Timmy is mad at you and doesn't want you as his mother anymore." I tried to explain that some patients came to the hospital when I was about to finish work, and I had to help out. But my mother sighed and handed me a few pictures, saying, "These were taken when you took Timmy out to play. Take a look." "Feels so good," I said after taking a shower and changing into comfortable clothes. I lay down on the bed feeling exhausted. I couldn't help but groan as I carefully looked at my son's pictures. Timmy looked a lot like his dad, very handsome. His eyes were so clear and pure. I couldn't help but kiss the photo of my son. Wait, what's that? Behind my son's photo was a patch of short bushes. I could faintly see the face of a child peeking out between the bushes, with delicate eyebrows and an eager expression. Ha 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 ha, someone had photobombed. I didn't pay it much attention and put the photo next to my pillow before falling asleep. These days had been really tiring. Late at night, a light mist drifted out from the photo by my pillow and gradually condensed into the shape of a child. It was the same child who photobombed. The child glanced at me, sound asleep, and made no sound. The child floated gently out of the room, toward Timmy's room. Pointing at the door opened. The child stood beside Timmy's bed, silently watching him for a while. Finally, the child reached out a finger and touched Timmy's face, quickly pulling it back. After a few attempts, the small hand slowly caressed Timmy's face. After a long time, the child sighed. The sound echoed through the empty room. The child floated back to my room, turning into a mist, and returned to the photo. I had a great night's sleep. And during breakfast, my mother asked if I had heard the voice of a child last night. I shook my head and said, I didn't hear anything. Maybe Timmy was talking in his sleep. No, it wasn't Timmy's voice. It was another child's voice. It sounded so pitiful. Mom, don't think too much. It might be a child from the neighbor's house. Don't be so suspicious, I said. My mother shook her head, and we stopped talking and woke Timmy up. A few days passed. My mother told me that she had heard Timmy chatting with another child in a very soft voice. She walked over and wanted to listen, but the voices stopped. She opened the door but found Timmy fast asleep. I didn't pay much attention. My mother had gotten older and she'd been taking care of Timmy for me since my husband passed away. She was tired. Sometimes stress could play tricks on our minds. Besides, I was a doctor and I didn't believe in ghosts and supernatural things. So I just told my mother to try to rest more and not overwork herself. One night I woke up suddenly feeling thirsty. Just as I was about to get up, I heard my son laughing. It instantly made me feel more at ease. Then I heard the voices of two children whispering to each other. I felt a sense of panic and rushed over to my son's room. The door was always open in case Timmy was sick, so I could hear any sounds earlier. I was scared, remembering my mother's words, but my maternal instinct overcame my fear. "Son!" I called out and rushed in, turning the lights on. My son had just laid down and didn't have time to cover himself with a blanket. He looked flustered. I quickly picked him up and ran to the door. "Who's there? Show yourself!" I shouted loudly, but no one answered. I called a few more times and my mother came over. "What's wrong?" she asked. I said someone was in Timmy's room. I carefully checked my son's room, but there was no one there. I asked Timmy, who were you talking to just now? Tell Mommy quickly." Timmy didn't say anything. I got angry and spoke sternly. "Why are you being so naughty? Tell Mummy now." Timmy hesitated, but still didn't tell me anything. I went to slap him, but suddenly a mist appeared in the room. A child appeared and angrily said to me, "Stop hitting him." It was me. So there really were ghosts. The child looked familiar. Oh right, it was the child in the photo. The child drifted over and said, "Don't be afraid. I mean no harm. I just wanted to chat with Timmy. My name is Michael. When I was 7 years old, I was hit by a car while playing on the street. My parents were devastated and moved away. I couldn't find them anymore. I've been wandering around ever since that day. I saw Timmy taking pictures and became curious, so I wanted to take a look. I didn't expect to be trapped in the photo. I can't leave. I really have no ill intentions. I just wanted to find someone to talk to. I've been so lonely." My mother sighed. Poor child. I listened and also felt a pang of sadness, but I still told him, "Ghosts and humans can't be friends, you know? How about this? Do you know your parents' names and phone number? I'll try to find them for you and let you see them." The child smiled and said, "I know. I'll tell you." The next day, I took a day off and waited at home for a visitor. A beautiful woman came in, her eyes red from crying. She'd already talked on the phone, and I showed her the picture. After she finished looking, she said, "It's him, it's really him. My son, Mommy, is here, come out." A mist appeared, and the child appeared again. The woman reached out to hug her son, but her arms went through him. She stood there in shock and started crying. "Don't cry, Mommy," Michael said sympathetically. He comforted his mother, and they talked for a long time. It was time to say goodbye. Michael put his hand on Timmy's hand and gently said, thank you all. I will miss you." The woman looked at me with pleading eyes. I understood and nodded, handing her the photo. She thanked me and left with the photo. "Timmy, let's sleep with Mommy from now on." "Okay, Mommy, thank you for helping Michael find his mommy. All right, go to sleep now." Nights were truly beautiful. I'll show you my photo. As I've aged into my middle years, nostalgia has become a frequent visitor. Today, while rummaging through old photos at home, I was struck by waves of reminiscence. Suddenly, I noticed that a cherished photo from my middle school days was damaged. How could this have happened to the picture I treasured so dearly? Originally, it was a snapshot of me and my good friend from middle school, Emily Johnson. Emily and I had always been close, and her untimely passing last year had left me heartbroken for months. Yet now, to my dismay, the photo seemed to have been tarnished in a peculiar way. Strangely, only Emily's face was blurred, as if obscured by water damage, erasing her features completely. Distressed over the only photo of her I had ruined, I felt an unease settling in my heart. I decided to call Emily's husband, with whom I was quite familiar, though we hadn't met since Emily's passing. After explaining my request for a photo of Emily to cherish her memory, he readily agreed to deliver one personally. Relieved by his promise, I resumed sorting through the old photographs. But then, something odd happened. I noticed that the faces in several photos were blurred just like Emily's. There was Michael Brown, who had passed away over a decade ago, David Smith, who died 5 years ago, and Mr. Anderson, who had been in a fatal car accident the year before. My hands began to tremble uncontrollably. I couldn't bear to look at the old photos anymore. Just then, Emily's husband called. Shaking, I answered the phone. Before he could speak, I blurted out, "Is Emily's photo blurred too?" There was a sinister chuckle on the other end. "Photos of the deceased are always blurred. Open the door and I'll show you my photo." The phone clattered to the floor from my trembling hands. My eyes were fixated on the doorknob, shaking violently. With a loud bang, as the door burst open, overwhelmed by fear, I collapsed, fainting. Right before my eyes closed, I caught a glimpse of Emily's husband standing in the doorway, holding a very old, tattered photo in his hands. In the eerie silence of my living room, with the phone still lying on the floor, I was paralyzed with fear. Emily's husband stood there, an unsettling grin on his face, the old photo in his hand now clearly visible. It was a worn photo, edges frayed and colors faded. But the most disturbing part was the face in the photo. It was completely blurred, just like the others. His eyes, however, were sharp and piercing, almost as if they were looking right through me. "I thought you might want to see this," he said, his voice unnaturally calm. "It's been happening to all my photos since she passed." His words sent chills down my spine. The room felt colder, the air heavier. I struggled to find my voice. Why Why is this happening? He shrugged, a look of resignation on his face. I don't know. Maybe it's the way the dead remind us they're still here. Or maybe it's just the moisture in the air. Old photos do that sometimes. We stood in silence for a moment, the weight of his words hanging between us. Finally, he handed me the photo. Keep it if you want. I have plenty more. As he left, the atmosphere in the room seemed to lighten. I was left alone, holding the blurred photo, a mix of relief and confusion swirling within me. For days afterward, I pondered over the mystery of the blurred faces. I even visited a local expert in photography who suggested that it could be due to a chemical reaction in the photo paper, common in older photographs. Though the logical explanation provided some comfort, the incident left a lingering feeling of unease. Sometimes, late at night, I would wake up thinking about the blurred faces, wondering if there was more to it than just a chemical reaction. But life had to go on. I kept the photo with me, a bittersweet reminder of friends lost and the inexplicable mysteries that occasionally brush against our lives.